Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Gina Chavez. I'm a communications associate at Every Texan, where we believe that social justice requires public policy. And y'all, today we have just heard the Comptroller Glenn Hagar release the revenue forecast for the next 2 years. But before we jump into the numbers, I do just want to acknowledge that we're in a new year. Happy New Year to everyone. And acknowledge that we are living in a global pandemic, which has largely affected people of color. Especially here in Texas, we're feeling the ripples of that. We are normally at the Capitol for this particular event. And as you all are well aware, we are tuning in live from our houses. And so I just want to welcome everybody. We're going to talk about the numbers that we just heard from the Comptroller. And I think one of the big things is that, the budget and the revenue estimate for many of us, myself included, is not something that I'm typically super involved in, super aware of. But it is a moral document. The Texas budget is basically the job of our legislators to pass every 2 years. And so it's huge. It's huge for all Texans. It is what allows us access to healthcare, to education, and so many more things. And so this is an important event, especially as we are in a global pandemic, especially as we are dealing with racial injustice in our country. And so we're here to talk about the numbers and what they mean for Texans. And I am joined by two of the state's top budget and revenue experts, and also my colleagues, DeLuna Castro and Dick Lavine. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to this. It's an important day.
Well, we just heard the numbers, and I do believe that people will start filtering in here as they are just tuning out of the revenue estimate, which just ended with the Comptroller. So let's kind of start at a high level. Eva, I don't know if you can help us understand the big key numbers that we just heard, and we can start diving into what those mean for Texans.
Sure, I will take a stab at that. And it's, as you mentioned, we've all been forced to work from our homes, and we're actually lucky we can do that. A lot of people don't have that option. But in any case, one challenge for me has been explaining the state budget through Zoom, through all these online ways, in a way that helps people understand what's at stake here. What the Comptroller said today was that we have less of a problem. We have a smaller revenue shortfall for 2021, the year that we're still in the middle of. So instead of an almost $5 billion revenue shortfall we were talking about last summer, it's down to almost $1 billion. So that is great news, because what he's saying is the economic situation has not been as dire as I had previously expected. That's good news, because that means the sales taxes that support 5.5 million kids in schools, almost, I think more than 1.5 million students enrolled in public colleges and universities, millions of people, as you mentioned, that depend on the state for access to healthcare, which is critically important during a pandemic. So what's at stake here is how we pay for healthcare, education, and those two right there, just those are 85% of the general revenue budget. So what we were looking for today was something that indicated that could be met with the amount of revenue he's forecasting through August of 2023. And we're still going to be digging through the numbers and making sure what exactly is happening here. It takes a while, but one kind of key thing, I mentioned the revenue shortfall is smaller. That's good news. Another thing he told us was that there's going to be $11.6 billion in the rainy day fund that legislators can use. And Dick can talk a little more about how that fund was originally created, what it's supposed to do. But having that size of a reserve on hand makes us much better prepared than other states that have been dealing with these cuts to services for the previous year. So I'd say that the initial take that I had was this is better than a lot of people had been expecting. It'll still be a challenge, I think, to get the legislature to use the Economic Stabilization Fund for the purposes for which it was intended.
Thank you. Maybe we should talk a little bit about the Economic Stabilization Fund, otherwise known as the Rainy Day Fund. Why don't we dive into that a little bit?
Sure. Let me give you just a little bit of the history so you can see what the purpose of it is. In the 1980s, the Texas economy and the Texas state budget was much more dependent on oil and gas. And there was a point at which oil and gas prices fell by like 2/3. And the situation was so bad that the legislature, in fact, had to come into special session in 1986 just to cut the budget because they didn't have a savings account they could fall back on. Well, they learned from that. And they said, we don't want to ever have to go through this again. So they set up the Economic Stabilization Fund, which is our savings account. And it takes a certain amount of revenue from oil and gas production taxes, also called severance taxes, and sets it aside. And in the past, it never had that big a balance, but they were always willing to spend it for whatever they needed. Well, now it's gotten quite big. As Eva mentioned, the controller says it'll be about $11.6 billion by the end of the next biennium. And the purpose is to smooth out the bumps, to stabilize. So when we run into trouble in the economy, which we certainly have because of the pandemic, we can fall back on the savings account so we don't have to cut services and so that we can keep doing what we need to do. The money is there to be used and we need it now and we should use it now.
Well, and what does this mean for, what is the estimate that we just heard? What does it mean for the 22-23 budget?
I'll talk a little more about that. I think one thing Dick and I have realized over the previous sessions that we've paid attention to the biennial revenue estimate is that it usually gets compared to what are we doing right now? Like what is the current budget? The budget that the legislature signed off on in 2019 was about 118 billion in just regular old general revenue. So everybody compares this revenue forecast to that and tries to think, is this enough? Is this a surplus? Like what kind of situation is it? What we try and help people understand, and I think we've done a good job, is it's not just a matter of taking care of what we're currently doing. It's what happens in the next 2 years. The controller mentioned we have a rapidly growing population, people moving here. Texas has a high birth rate. Like just more people means you have to invest more in schools and colleges, healthcare programs, roads, things that aren't in the general revenue part of the budget, but you need more services just to keep up with population growth. And then the other issue is things usually cost more every 2 years. So getting enough general revenue just to keep what we have going is a key part of understanding what if this is enough. Basically, the question is this enough? The other thing to know about the revenue estimate is that it's basically setting a limit on what the legislature can do in the next 2 years, unless they're willing to find other sources of revenue, or use the rainy day fund temporarily to keep from making cuts. But for the next 2 years, again, just kind of high level look at what's happening. We needed probably about 123 billion to just keep things going, to maintain the promises to schools that were made in House Bill 3 in 2019. The controller mentioned that's something that everybody, our state lawmakers are determined to do. It's a partnership, basically. The state puts in money for school districts, and then local school districts have property taxes primarily to pay for their part of it. So the increased need primarily for schools and education is a big driver in the state budget. He also mentions healthcare, which is Medicaid and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. Just doing what we're doing now takes more money. The good news there is that we're getting extra federal help paying for that. So I think one thing to take away from this morning is a lot of what happens in the next 2 years, access to education and healthcare, depends not just on the legislature making the right choices, but also on Congress helping states, Texas especially, keep these healthcare programs in place by continuing the better match that we got last year and maybe improving it. I mean, if we can keep and maybe expand access to Medicaid. We're hearing a lot of talk about Medicaid expansion. Those two things would make a huge difference in access to healthcare in the next 2 years.
I want to jump in here and just welcome everybody who is logging on. My name is Gina Chavez. I am here with two of the top state revenue and budget experts, DeLuna Castro and Dick Lavine. We are all from Every Texan, and we are here to talk about the Biennial Revenue Estimate. I do also want to remind you, we have some wonderful comments in the comment section. Please feel free to ask questions. We will get to your questions, and so feel free to give our experts a run for their money, pun intended, and we'll get to all those questions. So lay them on us as we continue diving into the revenue estimate. Dick, I want to let you kind of jump in here.
Yeah, as Eva mentioned, sometimes people will just look at how much money the legislature will have to write in the next budget. And if it's the same as what they use this time, they figure, well, no problem. Well, as she mentioned, there's always the problem of the increased number of people, more students, more people in nursing homes, more Texans driving on highways. And also things cost more every year. But in addition, the controller had a very important op-ed in the Dallas Morning News that I just saw this morning, and I may have been in yesterday's hard copy, where he talks about the need to maintain long-term investments too. And he mentions a couple of things specifically. For instance, pension funds. The legislature did make some move to help the teacher retirement system, but there's also the employees retirement system for state workers that the pension fund just doesn't have enough money. It needs more so it can continue to pay out the pensions we've promised to people who have worked in the state. And that's also very important for our credit rating. And the controller mentions that very specifically this morning, that he doesn't want to go down the path of New Jersey, which fell into real problems because they weren't funding their pension funds enough. And the controller mentioned other things. For instance, water. The legislature has acted to improve the situation for water in the state, but we have two different problems. We have parts of the state without enough water, and we have parts of the state, like Houston after Hurricane Harvey, with too much water. And those are long-term investments. You can't just keep waiting, or you'll be finding yourself in trouble, in a hole that's too deep to get out of. So those kinds of things the legislature has to move forward with and continue to look 10 years, 20 years into the future and not just try to balance the budget for the next 2 years.
Well, and Eva, I know that you mentioned both of you are kind of bringing up things that jumped out at you at today's revenue estimate from the controller. Eva, I wonder if you might speak to, diving into those numbers a little bit more. I know that you said we're all probably a little surprised it wasn't quite as bad as we were expecting. And so, what else jumped out at you today?
Well, of course, I think the controller began and kind of kept mentioning the heightened uncertainty of what's happening now. He has to make a revenue forecast that takes us into the next 30 months. And that's probably the hardest job in state government. The sales tax is primarily what can go up or down. The ability of people to keep a roof over their head and to buy groceries and necessities, all of that depends. Again, I mentioned earlier, Congress continuing some critical aid, unemployment benefit extension, for example, that passed in December, direct payments to people, the stimulus payments, housing aid. There's so many things that we need in order to keep the revenue estimate that he just gave us, make it a reality or maybe improve on it. Like he's basically saying, this is what I can tell you right now, but it just depends on so many things. We have never been in a situation like this. So the what's at stake, I think, again, for those of you just tuning in, is how do we educate 5.5 million school kids? How do we help teachers who have been desperately trying to do their best all year. Some of them being asked to teach 3 different ways now instead of just in the classroom. So what else do we provide? Dick, I think that op-ed you mentioned by the controller also mentioned things like broadband and internet challenges. If the next few years are going to be online learning for a lot of college students and public school students, how do we do that when a lot of Texans don't have really good access and can't get on Zoom and talk to their teachers? So there's a lot of things that need to be done, not just to help us recover from this pandemic, but also to help us be better prepared for the next public health emergency, because there will be one. The State Health Services Department was trying to do a lot years ago to prepare us for what's happening now. And obviously, it's like we need to be better prepared next time.
Right. That's a good example of how you can't just say, well, do we have enough to fund what we funded last time? Things have changed. And Ev is correct. The controller also specifically mentioned distance learning, because there are millions of Texans without access to broadband that they would need for their children. And it's not just rural areas of Texas. There's obviously people in the urban areas who personally cannot afford Wi-Fi, but they have kids, and the kids need education, and it's the state's responsibility that those kids receive the education. Mm. Another thing the controller mentioned is telemedicine. I mean, people are reluctant to go to the doctor's offices, and obviously there's a great increase in demand for doctors. Well, you can't get telemedicine if you don't have the correct internet access. So these are new demands that have to be met and are going to cost more money than what we spent in the past.
We have some great questions coming in. So let's see. One of the first ones we had was, is there any indication on whether the state will extend hold harmless funding for schools for the spring semester? Was that anything that the controller mentioned?
He did not. There'd be no change. I mean, whatever the rules are from established by HB 3, the school finance bill that they passed last session, will continue through the end of this fiscal year unless the legislature changes it. So if there are certain hold harmless provisions that protect school districts, they'll stay in effect unless for some reason, which I can't imagine, they'd be changed. But, you know, an important part of the school finance plan that was passed, everybody said was $11 billion for public ed. Well, in fact, it was $6 billion new dollars for public ed and $5 billion of state money just to replace local property taxes for no net gain. Well, the legislature could easily just suspend those property taxes called compression. It's mandatory property tax cuts. So that when property values go up, the schools don't benefit. It just forces down the rate so they don't have any net gain. You could suspend that just for 2 years during this important economic dislocation to help our schools and to relieve pressure on the state budget so that we can make other investments, for instance, in helping to cover our uninsured people.
We also have a question from Deborah Caldwell. I'm not sure if y'all can see these comments on the side, but it says, if we need $123 billion just to keep prior commitments, how is that impacting with general purpose revenue available of $112.53?
I'll tackle that because it does get kind of into a lot of details about possible choices that legislators could make. One, of course, is use the Economic Stabilization Fund. $123 billion to maintain state services in the next 2 years. They don't actually have to write a budget that appropriates $123 billion. One thing that legislators have gotten into the habit of doing is not fully funding Medicaid cost growth, for example, like just deal with some things when they come back in 2023. There's other things like using smoke and mirrors. Again, this is up to legislators to do. They know how to postpone a big payment to schools just like by 2 weeks. It doesn't hurt school districts' ability to make payroll and all that. It just kind of pushes it into the next fiscal cycle. Mm-hmm. The last time the legislature did that saved almost $2.5 billion. So there's like a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors. Those needing to know how those work, so not concerned about whether this is a cut. basically you undo them as soon as you can. Extra federal aid, we are still expecting additional federal aid. An example of why that helps so much is the 2019 legislature underfunded Medicaid by at least $2.5 billion in general revenue. The extra help we got from Congress in the last year that legislators couldn't have known about when they were writing the budget has reduced a shortfall for Medicaid to less than $1 billion. So Congress giving states aid, they did this in 2011, and they did it to a much smaller extent in 2003. It helps us keep healthcare and education programs going until our own state revenue sources recover. So using additional federal aid instead of taxes, expanding Medicaid, we've talked about. There are studies that show we could have a net gain to the state budget. We might need maybe $600-700 million in general revenue to expand Medicaid, but in the end, it pays for itself and it draws down more than $5 billion a year in extra help to help people have access to healthcare and to help our healthcare providers have some ability to pay their bills. So it's there's a lot of solutions, but I think $123 billion when we have almost $12 billion economic stabilization fund, that's like 10% of what we need. That is a very, very good cushion to have on hand. There are a lot of things that can be done to make this work, and it's up to the House and Senate to do it. It's a compromise that will be reached by May. The other things we heard in the press conference was interim cuts that have already been made to the 2020-21 budget. We don't think any additional cuts to state services can be made in this year without severe harm being done to things we all rely on. Some cuts that maybe would make sense are redirecting what we're spending on prisons and border security. Those are two things that may be redirecting resources to other services that are much more critically needed right now. And then again, a lot of things when state revenue recovers can be reconsidered or put back in the budget. What we don't want to see happening, honestly, is what happened after the last two recessions or economic setbacks. What happens is revenue goes down because of the recession. Legislators cut services, and then when they come back and the economy has bounced back and revenue has come back, they say, "Oh, look, we have extra money." And they cut taxes. They've cut the franchise tax, for example. So you restore the services that used to be there, and then you deal with long-term needs. We've talked about long-term things that we know we're going to need. And then you start talking about whether you have, quote unquote, too much tax revenue. Texas is, as long as I've been doing this, which is almost 30 years, we've been in the bottom 5 among states in what we collect to invest in our people, our schools, our parks, our court systems, all of that. So we don't start off in a great place as far as cuts. And then, there's so many needs that are unaddressed that that just does not prepare us at all, either for a pandemic or just for dealing with the long-term things that make all of us able to share in prosperity.
Yeah, and we've been talking about the changing world and the changing demands for public services. But, the tax system changes too. And the controller spent a little bit of time talking about how much more money the state was able to bring in sales taxes because of a change that was made by the legislature last session involving remote sales, internet sales. It used to be if you could buy something on the internet from out of state, from a company that wasn't doing business in Texas except remotely like that, you didn't have to pay sales tax. Well, that obviously didn't reflect the changes in the economy, and especially what's been happening in the last year. Luckily, the legislature did make a change to bring the tax system up to date to reflect the new economic structures of the 21st century. And it brought in, I think the controller said, $1.3 billion. Very worthwhile, more than enough to cover what's the current deficit by his definition. Well, there's other changes that could be made. The legislature should continue to look at them, to look at our tax system to see if it really does reflect what the economy looks like now, and whether it produces enough money and enough money in a fair way to meet our demands. You don't start with, well, it's good enough to do what we used to do. You start with, what do we need to do and how can we fund it? That's the right question to ask.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Again, there's a lot of great comments and questions here. I do know that our own Chandra Villanueva said, a Raise Your Hand Texas analysis found it costs almost $500 more per student to address COVID safety and operations in our schools. And, you know, I know that I have seen, my wife is actually a public school teacher. And so we've been living in a very personal way, you know, the hazards and all of the questions of what it means to have public schools, be in public schools, and that they're the true foundation of our society. And yet we've been disinvesting, we've been defunding our public schools. And so, you know, I just wanted to make a note that it's a huge part of the state budget. And so I don't know if there's any other kind of pieces of nuggets of information that we can share with people, especially as we are in a pandemic, which is largely, I don't know, I feel like we're feeling the results of the disinvestment in our public schools now more than ever, and what exactly we need to do about it moving forward.
Yeah, I saw another question in our Facebook on our Facebook page about special education. Again, something that the state was not living up to its responsibilities. Even before any of this came along, the federal government was looking at how we're providing special education services or not providing them, honestly. Foster care, a safe foster care system is another thing that that legislators would have been challenged to fix before any of this happened. So there are so many things that we need to do. The budget, again, for those of you just joining us, it's the one thing the legislature does every 2 years that it has to get done to keep support for schools and healthcare and public safety, all these basic things going. You'll notice I didn't say highways. Highways is a special fund that gets money from gasoline taxes and oil and gas severance taxes and some sales. It's basically constitutionally a carve out. It doesn't compete for any of these things that we're talking about today. But even highways do need more resources than Texas has devoted in the past. So the number of challenges that we have that have never been addressed. That is kind of a long-term advocacy challenge, helping people understand how you keep up with growth, how you provide better opportunities. Otherwise, what happens is we leave communities to their own local resources, and there's huge differences across Texas in what communities can do with their own sales tax bases and property tax bases. Houston and the Gulf Coast are going to be affected much more differently from this economic downturn than the Rio Grande Valley and Dallas and Midland. So everybody is in a different situation. It's the state budget's job to provide some kind of base level of services, and then local communities may want to do more than that if they can. But just some access to basic services that we can all rely on. I'll just say one more thing. I personally don't have kids enrolled in public school or in college, but I benefit from parks and clean air and clean water and consumer protection agencies. All of these things depend on the state budget and there being enough state taxes to pay for that. So there's so much riding on this and will help people understand. This happens the day before the legislature meets. And then there's a very, very long process through which we end up with a budget. But this is the beginning, I think, is not as bad as we were worried about. It's very likely, though, with so much uncertainty, that in 2023 we may come back and things still aren't recovered fully. The past two recessions, it's been like 40 months before Texas got back to where it was before a recession came along. And that is a long time to not have revenue keeping up with demands, existing demands, and then new things created by these dire economic circumstances we're in the middle of. So we may be looking at what can legislators do, at least get a conversation started to identify ways of paying for things in 2023 and beyond. By then, if they use the rainy day fund now as they should, there won't be as much in it 2 years from now.
Yeah, let me just continue on this and using highways as an example, which is I mentioned that when the Economic Stabilization Fund was set up, they took oil and gas revenue and set most of it aside for the rainy day fund. Well, in fact, recently they took the amount that was being set aside to I should call it the Economic Stabilization Fund, and split it, half to the Economic Stabilization Fund and half to the Highway Fund. And the Highway Fund now gets a certain amount of money from our sales tax, our ordinary sales tax, and a certain amount of money from our motor vehicle sales tax. And it's still not enough. And the House Committee on Transportation looked at this during the interim. Legislative committees between sessions do deeper in drill downs into issues. And they came up with the proposal that perhaps what we need to do is to raise the gasoline tax, which goes to fund highways, and index it to inflation so that it will keep up with the cost of fixing our roads and building new roads. And this is a key point, which is both that the gasoline tax hasn't been raised for literally 30 years, since 1991, and most of our state budget and our school finance funding and things like that are not adjusted for inflation. So we'll always fall behind every year as things cost more. And now, in keeping with the long-term focus that the controller recommended in his op-ed, is a good time to look and see what we can do to build in some of these automatic increases, both in funding and in spending, for instance, on public ed, so we won't continuously be trying to catch up because we've been falling behind.
Thank you. I do want to say, for those who might just be tuning in, we are talking about the Biennial Revenue Estimate from the Texas State Comptroller, and we're here with our two of the state's top experts, who also happen to be my fabulous colleagues, DeLuna Castro and Dick Lavine of Every Texan. We have a lot of great questions in the comment section, and I will assure you that if we are not able to get to them while we are live right now, we will continue to type answers, and you are more than welcome to, find us on your favorite social media, come to our website, everytexan.org. You can find all of our emails there and everything. So we are definitely available even beyond this live stream. Let's take some more questions. So I know that we had, I was looking for a question from one of our former colleagues, Chloe Sykes. Thanks for tuning in. We have ever mentioned that Texas would need $123 billion to maintain state spending promises, but the comptroller estimate says $112 billion. Why does he only cite a $1 billion shortfall?
What he's talking about is for the budget that we're in the middle of, to get to August of 2021. We are, let's see, this is January, 8 months out from the end of this 2-year budget cycle. So previously, he had told us that we'd be almost $4.6 billion short of just paying this session's bills. And that was before the Medicaid shortfall that was going to be needed. Prisons, correctional managed health care, that was going to be some additional costs. He mentions also some supplemental costs like the Texas Tomorrow Fund, prepaid contracts for hire. So there's always things that need to be in a supplemental bill. Some other sessions, it's been things like disasters, wildfires or flooding, things that happen that you didn't know or didn't decide to put in the budget. So things in 2021 improving from being $4.6 billion in the hole to $1 billion in the hole. That's just talking about August of 2021. Going forward through August of 2023, which is an extremely difficult thing to forecast. In his forecast, he has things like population growth. That's a little easier to predict. But inflation, the cost of crude, what is crude oil going to sell for, a barrel of crude oil? All of these things affect his revenue estimate. I think he mentioned during the press conference that analysts are saying oil might be like from $20 to $80. That's like a pretty huge range on which to base your forecast. The sales tax is really hugely affected by how the energy industries do. So, and I guess to get back to the issue of through 2023, the budget that the legislature has to write, they might not have enough general revenue to deal with all those costs, but they do have the Economic Stabilization Fund. They have almost another $12 billion there. They would have $5 billion more in sales taxes to deal with current services, but we put that in the highway fund. They would have a couple billion more in the rainy day fund, but we put that in the highway fund. So there's a lot of things that take money off the table. We're collecting taxes, but we've already earmarked them for certain things. So legislators are constrained by past choices as to what they can do in the next 2 years. But again, federal money that is going to come help balance the budget. Again, federal money, not just through the budget, but help directly for individuals so that they can actually pay their own bills and indirectly pay taxes that support all of this. The key things that the feds have done in the past is help by paying a bigger share of Medicaid and CHIP costs. The other thing they've done in the past is help public schools, which is kind of general revenue kind of money. That has helped reduce state costs for the school formulas already by about $1 billion. So there's a lot of things that have already happened to help reduce the 2021 shortfall. We need those things to continue in the next 2 years and hopefully to be expanded to help us even more. That takes advocacy from groups like us, from other community-based organizations, but also from our legislators and our congressional delegation. Another thing, again, that ways that you can help people. Right before the holidays, there were changes to the federal earned income tax credit and child tax credit. There's stimulus payments. So the feds basically have a lot of tools they can use to help the states. And what needs to happen in Texas is to take full advantage of that. The Coronavirus Relief Fund was also mentioned. Representative Donna Howard's office has been on top of that, helping people understand what is this money available for, how much has been used, what is still available to help the cities and counties dealing with the public health costs of COVID-19. So all of this, it's a lot to absorb, but there are some tools that legislators can use to deal with our current 2 budget cycles, and then there's things Congress can do to help us. I saw also in the comments some questions about what, again, I know some of you will be looking at this later, but some existing challenges that have always been there, special education, unemployment assistance. We did see a lot of people trying to get unemployment benefits, but the state administers that system. If it doesn't have enough people answering the phone, a lot of people get discouraged or just think, I'm never going to get through. So there are things we need to deal with as a state legislature that tells the Workforce Commission how many people can work there. Another question I saw, I'm going to kind of jump around here. Somebody was wanting to know, I think it's Nancy Walker, are we going to undo those 5% cuts that were made to the budget? 5% of general revenue spending is probably going to be cut in the supplemental bill. It's about $1 billion. Some of those cuts were already going to happen, like closing state prisons and reducing state employment in prisons by hundreds of people. So the question was, is that going to be undone when there's revenue that recovers, enough revenue? It's another complicated question. Some of those cuts were for things like travel that didn't happen because of COVID-19. Others are actual real cuts, like to the Texas Grants Program, helping students enroll in colleges and helping them with tuition on a need-based financial aid basis. There was a cut that was made. We used federal money to temporarily keep it going. But in the long run, we need to go back to paying for it with our own state taxes. So you're going to see that playing out through a lot of things in the budget. We may get help temporarily to keep things going, but we need to remember in 2023, this is a state responsibility, and we need to step up again and make sure that that help is there for college students that need it. That's just one example. There are going to be many, many, many more, because that's what happened in 2011.
Thank you. Once again, we are diving into the Biennial Revenue Estimate here with our experts, DeLuna Castro and Dick Lavine. Again, please leave your comments. If we don't get to them during the live stream, we will definitely get to them afterwards. I also want to remind you that we have Point of Order, which is a newsletter that goes out to give you all of your updates at the Texas Ledge. We are there for you. Not only on budget and tax issues, but on things ranging from education, higher ed, medical care, health, healthcare insurance, all kinds of good stuff. And so we want you to stay in touch with us. I do believe we can throw a link in the chat to the Point of Order newsletter sign up. Dick, let's talk a little bit more about some of the things that jumped out to you. We also have some questions about things like property taxes. I know that Monty had raised a little earlier. Can you speak more about the cost of increases in property tax valuation or not on the increase in the cost of property tax compression to the state and the upcoming biennium?
Right. Well, let me just start with the headline number you're going to be seeing is that $1 billion deficit that the controller mentioned. And I hope it's clear now that that's only in the short run to get us out of the current state budget, not taking into account various things that Eva's gone into in detail. But what we really need to focus on is longer term, not just what would it take to spend the same amount in the next budget as would take to spend in the current budget, but what would it take to keep moving forward into the future? Not just to keep up with inflation and population growth, which you would think would be just the minimal demands, but all the new stuff that's happened because of COVID. I see that Chandra Villanueva, our school finance expert, relays a number from Raise Your Hand, Texas, that schools require $500 per student more than they've been getting just because of extra COVID costs, because of the need to have smaller class size or the need for kids to learn remotely, whatever else their other issues are. We need to look forward that way, is because we're not going to be living through 2020 again. We're going to be living in 2022 and 2023, and the world is different than it used to be, and it may take more money to take care of the needs that Texans have. Now, let me just talk about property taxes. I think I mentioned before that the school finance bill that passed last session, almost half of the headline number of that, the $11 billion, was not actually new money for schools. It was just putting in state money to replace local property taxes and force tax rates down as tax values went up so that schools wouldn't have any more. You could suspend that for 2 years, taking into account the new world that we are living in. People wouldn't necessarily be paying more. They would just not be converting higher values into tax cuts. They'd be converting higher values into more money for schools or more money that the state could spend somewhere else because the schools can take care of themselves. There was a question actually for the controller about the change in property values because of the pandemic. That's something I've been reading about a lot, like the Wall Street Journal, because who wants a downtown office building filled with people closely packed together, breathing each other's air? People can work from home now, which means they don't have to live near downtown. They can live far away and not commute. That changes the values of the office buildings. It changes the values of suburban housing. And may incidentally lessen the need for more highways. What thing is that your tax bill, your property tax bill, is based on your property value that the appraisal district sets, and then the property tax rate that's set by your city or county or school district. Well, property values may be all different now because of the changes we just mentioned, and also because of oil and gas reducing the value out in, say, Midland of what the oil fields are worth. So what we really need is what's called sales price disclosure. let the state and the appraisal district know when things are bought and sold, how much are they bought and sold for, so they can determine what the right value is, so we can get accurate and fair taxation in this new world created by COVID. That's one of the changes that needs to be made so we can keep up to date and be prepared for the future, whatever that might bring us.
All right, y'all. We still have a strong crowd going, so I think we're gonna keep going here. We had a question a little earlier that would kind of take us back to the beginning. Trying to find it here, but basically, this person was asking just kind of, what was your general takeaway from the numbers today? Were you more optimistic? Are we more conservative? Let's kind of, take another high level look at the numbers today.
I'll take a stab at that. I think again, and I tend to be, for those of you who know me personally, a very, very pessimistic person. No matter what you tell me, I start to look for like, what aren't we hearing? When's the other shoe gonna drop that's full of really horrible news? This forecast that we got today, yes, we don't have enough money to fully pay for the current budget cycle or to deal with everything in the next 2 years. But honestly, legislators never fully fund the entire cost of Medicaid. There's a lot that they do leave for the next 2 years. So smoke and mirrors, using federal aid that's available, all of that will definitely help. But I think in the end, it will still come down to their willingness to use the Economic Stabilization Fund, using the rainy day fund to cover that $1 billion shortfall that we're seeing by the end of 2021. That sounds like a very reasonable thing to do. If you have almost 12 billion expected to be there, almost 9 is already there. It's not a forecast. It's money the state already has. Why wouldn't you use 1 of that 9 billion to stop making cuts in 2021? So that to me is good news. We have a very, very easy way to deal with a shortfall in 2021. And it's again, some of this may be totally new to people who have just started working for the Texas legislature. The budget can't continue to be in a deficit. It's not like the federal one. The legislature has to deal with this one before it writes the next one. There's probably technical ways that it could carry forward deficits, but it still has to balance the budget. They can't spend more money than the controller says is available. So again, back to the good news, the budget, the general revenue budget that we're talking about today is primarily how we help school districts educate 5.5 million school kids, how we help 4.5 million Texans that are accessing healthcare through Medicaid and CHIP. We've talked earlier about how Medicaid expansion could help. It's very favorable for Texas as far as what we would put in of our own state tax dollars to bring in billions of extra federal money for healthcare. But the main thing is almost 2 million Texans, 2 million more Texans could have access to healthcare if the legislature made a honestly long overdue decision to expand Medicaid the way that most other states have done. And why that's important is we have so many Texans working in jobs that do not provide health insurance or don't provide health coverage that's affordable. Cashiers, fast food workers, a lot of the people that are still having to go out and do their jobs in person, they can't do it from home, and the risks that they're taking, and then not having health insurance, that's unconscionable, I think, especially if we're trying to recover from a pandemic. So helping people with the basic things in the budget, and then helping local communities provide additional services that voters will sign off on. Dick talked about property taxes. Primarily that's for schools, but there's also cities and counties out there having to deal with public safety, public health costs, local hospitals, EMS, all of these things are primarily funded by property taxes. So helping legislators understand our state and local system and how it works together to provide services that we all need is I think that it's always been the challenge. Using the rainy day fund has always been a challenge. There's a lot of new legislators who may have been elected and have been told that's only for hurricanes. It's seriously like just for like rainy weather. It can be used by the legislature for whatever they want. They've regularly used it to do one-time things like create a state water plan, or to create all these funds that Dick mentioned to deal with floods. But if they can agree, a 3/5 vote would most likely be what applies in these circumstances. They can use it. And with other good news that we're hearing, I think throughout the year, not just today, is that legislators are committed to keeping the school finance plan going. The governor and the lieutenant governor, all the top state officials, I think they need to be understanding that. I think what we heard a lot in 2011 was rhetoric about protecting the rainy day fund. And honestly, every time I heard that, it's like it's a pile of money. We don't protect a pile of money. We need to make sure that Texans have what they need to help our local economies recover. So that kind of rhetoric, to me, I just don't understand what that means. Our credit ratings have been fine every time we've used the rainy day fund. We've spent the fund down to almost zero in the past, and we were still perfectly okay as far as the bond houses were concerned. So we're helping people understand that money is there. It's a resource designed for times like the ones we're in now. And if the session ended and cuts were made, instead of using this savings account that was designed for these times, that would be a pretty major step in the wrong direction.
Oh, Dick, I'm not hearing you. I'm not sure. Maybe try an unplug, replug situation.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. On the Economic Stabilization Fund, there was someone who called it, people were treating it like an icon, like a venerated object that you could not touch. And as Eva said, it's there for a purpose. I mean, this is exactly why we have it. And if you look at what the bond rating houses say, it's not the amount of money in the fund, it's the fact that it refills automatically. By the Texas Constitution, the large proportion of the oil and gas revenue has to go to the rainy day fund and also the highway fund, and part of it actually to the foundation school program. But because it refills automatically, it's okay with the bond funds, bond rating agencies, if we spend it, because they know it'll come back when the economy recovers. So if we need it, we should use it.
Thank you for that. So y'all, we are coming up on the 12 o'clock hour here in Austin, Texas. And I do want to leave a little bit of time for any closing statements. I also want to send our best out to everybody who's tuned in and who will be tuning in. This conversation will be up on, we'll post it on YouTube. It will stay here on Facebook. And we, of course, love Twitter. So I hope that y'all will join us on Twitter. Eva, DeLuna Castro, and Dick Lavine are also very active on Twitter, and it's great to follow. Maybe we can throw their links in the comments here so you can go follow them on Twitter. We also have a Point of Order newsletter that is an incredible way to get recaps of what's happening at the Texas Ledge, what we are advocating for. We, of course, are one of the few, multi-issue organizations here in Texas. We believe that social justice requires public policy, and when Ledge session is in session, we are gangbusters. So this is our Olympics right now. So we're excited to be here with you and breaking down the Biennial Revenue Estimate with this wonderful analysis. So I just want to leave a couple more minutes in case we had some closing statements from Eva or Dick. And of course, please continue to leave comments. We will continue to answer them even after we stop this live stream.
I will say I need to remember not to start every sentence with but I think what I was trying to do while we were going back and forth here, we've gotten more than one question about this 123 billion current services estimate that I put out there. if you take away my ability to use charts, it gets very difficult to explain that in a way that people can understand. So what I was trying to do is provide it as bonus content for those of you joining us on Facebook right now. I'll have to tweet it out, but it kind of explains what the budget is right now, what needs to grow. The school finance formulas, for example, can stay pretty much where they are. But what like there are estimates we've come up with based on the state agency budget proposals. I mean, those of you who come to us for numbers know it's because we don't just make stuff up. There's plenty of information out there that we're just trying to help people understand, whether it's coming from the legislative budget board or state agencies. So any of you who have questions or need details, I can point you to all of that. The Higher Ed Coordinating Board, for example, says what formula funding should be to achieve the 60 by 30 plan. So bonus content will be coming for those of you following us on Twitter and Facebook. But I think the key thing, we'll be updating the ESF piece. Anything that we try and get out there, we want to make sure it's up to date and that it responds to questions you really need to know to do your jobs better as legislative staffers, as community advocates, as local officials who need to know what's going to be happening at home that the state may or may not be helping you with. So that's our job, and we welcome hearing from you to know how we can do that better and respond in time to make a difference.
Right. Let me just say, I've just now had a chance to look at some of the questions in the chat, and there are some very well-informed people who have been writing in. So I recommend that everyone take a look at that. And if there are people who had questions in the chat we didn't get to, please just email me directly and I'll do my best to answer your questions. My second point is we just can't be satisfied with the status quo. We can't say, do we have enough money just to keep doing what we have been doing? That's not good enough. The world's changed, the economy's changed, there's demands on education and public health because of the pandemic. We have to do better than we have been doing in the past, and we can do it. We have the rainy day fund available to us. We can make changes in our tax system if we need to, like we did last session, and the controller already mentioned how important that was to be able to tax internet sales. We have regular publication that comes out every 2 years, will be coming out soon, one called Who Pays Texas Taxes, and another one called Who Doesn't Pay Texas Taxes. So, and based on reports from the controller. So I encourage you to take a look at those and let's see what we can do to create a better future for all of us, even if it does cost a little bit more money.
Y'all, I think that was a great way to wrap up. Thank you so much to Dick Lavine and Eva DeLuna Castro for your expertise for so many years. And I know that right now, obviously, you know, we are very blessed that we can do our work from home and be able to tune in and still have this wonderful analysis. But we do send our love, and we are fighting at the Texas Capitol to make sure that all Texas families, especially those who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic, who are out there, and we're here for you. And that's exactly what this session is all about. It's not just about public policy, it's about people. And that's what we're here for. So thank you so much for tuning in today, everyone. Please, if you haven't checked out our new website, please go to everytexan.org. It's a beautiful new website, and as somebody on the communications team, very proud to have a nice looking and easily a user-friendly website to show you and present all of this wonderful information. So please check out our website. We hope that you'll sign up for the Point of Order newsletter, which will give you weekly updates on what's happening at the Texas Ledge. And follow us on Twitter. We do love our Twitter. So please continue to leave your comments. And y'all, we wish everybody a wonderful day. I do believe it snowed everywhere in Texas. So maybe we can all get out and enjoy the snow that only happens every few years here. So thank you so much. Signing off from Every Texan.
Thank y'all.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Gina.